afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and indeed good evening and afternoon and morning to those of you who are watching us online. We're coming to you live from Expo in Dubai for an important panel discussion on the path to net zero. Before I start, I'd like to thank Rosatom for the initiative in bringing us here today. It is indeed an extremely important topic and one that affects all of us around the world. I think when we think about the path to net zero, it looks quite long and sometimes quite foggy, in that it's far from certain how we'll get there. Although we do know that if we don't get there, the consequences can be grave. I think for us in the room today, and certainly for our children and future generations. So the fact that we need to get there is beyond disputes. But how we get there, this is a question that's still hotly debated. We'll try to advance that debate today. And of course, as we discuss how to reach the targets, I think there's probably a consensus that nuclear must play an important role. But what that role is and how big that role is and how nuclear should be developed, this is also still a point of discussion. And among the questions we will also be discussing today. So with that, let me introduce our excellent speakers. We have Mr. Alexey Likhachov, the Director General of Rosatom. Thank you for being here. Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, the Group Chairman and CEO of DP World. Your Excellency, it's a pleasure to see you. Dr. Sami Shaban Atallah Soliman, the Chairman of the Nuclear and Radiological Regulatory Authority in Egypt, ENRA, who will be joining us online from Cairo. So it's a pleasure to see you. And Sean Kidney, the co-founder and CEO of Climate Bonds Initiative, who is joining us online from Australia. So we're covering the globe with our speakers, and without further ado, let me kick off. And Dr. Noura, perhaps I can come to you with the first question. Just at the end of last year, a number of us, we gathered together in cold Glasgow at COP26, and I wonder if you could maybe share your impressions of the summit. What for you were some of the key takeaways and things that you think that we should be focusing on coming out of COP26? There we go.
Hello. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for your invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So indeed, COP26 was a very important gathering, especially that it has been delayed for a year for COVID-19. And so people were looking forward for actions and to see results in COP26. The outcome was a very good outcome, depending on how you see it. From a developing country's perspective, there's been a lot of progress from where we were. We have finalized the rule book of the Paris Agreement, and we kept the 1.5 degree within reach. For the first time, fossil fuel was mentioned in the cover decision, and I think this is very important, especially for oil-producing countries and for the energy transition. And perhaps this also, in light of the introduction that you provided, given the energy transition and the role of nuclear power. So nuclear power was not explicitly mentioned, but when we talk about the phasing down of unabated fossil fuels, nuclear comes to mind as the highest capacity factor amongst alternatives for a just and reliable transition. From the Saudi perspective, there's been a number of achievements, I would say, in the results and the outcome of COP26. The developing country perspective, the CBDR, Common but Differentiated Responsibility, was honored in the outcome of COP26. So even when we talk about the phasing out of inefficient fossil fuel, the qualifier was providing support for developing countries. There's been also an explicit mention of 1.5 degrees as the target and net zero by 2050, and the reduction of CO2 emissions by 45% by 2030. So I guess these great ambitions provide a roadmap for countries of where they get to go. And a number of countries, as you may know, have announced their net zero targets, including the UAE as the first country in the region to announce net zero by 2050, followed by Saudi Arabia, who announced the target of net zero by 2060 with a number of great initiatives. Perhaps we'll discuss this in the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And I'd like to indeed come back to the Saudi Arabia targets and sort of see if we can drill down into how you see that developing. But in the meantime, Sean, perhaps I can come to you in Australia. And as I was preparing for this summit, I was watching your keynote speech at the Climate Bonds Conference a few months ago. And there you certainly sounded the alarm on the climate change threats and rightly underscored the need for quite immediate and extreme action. But so I think if we look, for example, at the oil and gas industry, that there's a growing movement for this segment to sort of be blacklisted, for us to be thinking about this as the past. I wonder whether you think measures like that are realistic and sensible at this stage, or is there a risk that if the pressure against the fossil fuel intensive industries goes too far, then we run the risk of disruption, supply disruption, pricing problems that ultimately hit consumers. So I wonder if you can talk us through that challenge.
Well, thanks for the question. There's two ways to answer that. First is, can the change go too far to disrupt economies and so on? I'm afraid, frankly, not. For the last 30 years, we have, as a society, as economies, failed to listen to our climate scientists. And that's why we're in this pickle. Emissions have continued to go up. They bounced back 16% in 2021. Yet the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says they need to be at least half what they are now by 2030. That's an extraordinary short amount of time. So I'm going to say, in a way, it is not possible to be too ambitious given the challenge we face ourselves. And let's bear in mind what's at stake here. We're talking about catastrophic futures that are at risk, according to the IPCC. We will see by 2050 anyway, across the Gulf, consecutive weeks of 60 degrees Celsius temperatures. It'll require a massive change in the built environment of all our cities to allow them to be heat tolerant in a way, frankly, they are not now. And we will not be able to go outside. That is a future that we're looking at. In fact, that is a highly likely future at the moment. So I want to stress the ambition is not a choice here. It is a necessity. Now, of course, how do we get there? Look, I don't think it's a matter of blacklisting anything. What it is a matter of having a resolute and determined approach to transitioning our economies. We've seen, take Saudi, for example, some fantastic developments in the last few years. The city of NEOM is going to be a pure, clean energy city. That is exactly what we need to see in the future. With the learnings from the work in NEOM, we absolutely do hope that we will then see a consequent change in Riyadh and other cities of Saudi. That same lesson needs to be learned in the UAE. Of course, the UAE has been doing a lot, but it can do more. We've seen massive solar developments in the area. We need to switch off the gas and oil and be able to move entirely to renewable energy. I believe this we will do very soon, just because of the extraordinary cost reductions we're getting solar and the extraordinary irradiation intensity of Gulf countries. It's just becoming cheaper. Now, in terms of exporting, I think implied in your comment is that we need to stop oil and gas at demand, not supply. Yes, I do agree with you in principle, but that doesn't mean we don't need to try and do everything we can on every measure. So I would be arguing to Gulf economies how we rapidly change the economic basis of our societies from a fossil fuel base to a non-fossil use is the challenge of the millennia, the challenge of our societies. And the word rapid is the real issue. I do hope that Saudi will become a massive green hydrogen exporter in the near future. I hope that the revenues for that will allow it to weather the changes, because I do think the demand side is going to shrink for the oil and gas industry. But I hope further. I hope it'll allow the Saudi government, the UAE government, other Gulf governments to aggressively bring forward their plans to reduce dependence on oil and gas for the benefit of us all, and frankly, for the benefit of Gulf citizens, because the Gulf is one of the areas most going to be impacted by climate. This is where we will see severity of climate impact in a way that we will not see in other parts of the world. But it is transition. We have to transition our economies. What we have is what we have. The question is how quickly now we can get to low carbon. And I have to tell you, climate resilience, that's a big issue in the Gulf. Heat tolerance and the kind of storms that will come with extreme heat is going to be a whole new world for us now. We've got to prepare.
Sean, thank you very much indeed. It's a thought-provoking answer, and you've certainly touched on a number of issues that we will also be discussing further over the course of today's discussion. One organizational point that I would just like to point out, part of our discussion will be in Russian, so for those in the room here, you have your headsets if you need them. Господин Likhachov, если можно к вам.
Mr. Likhachov, I'd like to proceed to you now. Of course, nuclear energy is one of the cleanest types of energy from the point of view of CO2 emissions, but there are different views about the inclusion of nuclear energy into the net zero strategies, and Rosatom is also developing wind generation. From global practice, we can see how oil and gas companies are increasing the share of wind generation. Sometimes they simply say no to their traditional business, but what's the value of nuclear, and what is the long-term bet in your strategy on this type of generation? Thank you very much for the question. I would like to thank and welcome all the participants of our today's conference. And Tom, if I may, I'd like to answer in two parts. First, indeed, the previous year, no matter how difficult it was, has become, I would even use this word, revolutionary, from the point of view of attitude towards the climate agenda, and its revolutionary nature consists of a number of parameters, in my opinion. First, it is of course the transition from declarations to precise calculations and assessments of specific technologies. And of course, whenever we talk about carbon transition, and some countries target 2050, other countries target 2060. We understand that we are dealing with a huge global energy system that requires gigantic capital investments. And everyone who physically visited the People's Republic of China, India, and Vietnam, for instance, understand perfectly well what is the share of coal generation in such countries. I'm not even talking about gas in this case, and most probably for the midterm, for these countries, even gas can be considered to be the first step in reducing their carbon footprint. The second very important positive result of the previous year at COP26 in Glasgow, this point was actually accomplished. So that is the not de jure, but the de facto acknowledgement of the demand, of the need for nuclear technologies in this global transition, in the clean energy balance of the planet of the future. And this is not just an emotional, it is also a well-justified and quantified truth. On the eve of COP26, recommendations were issued by the Joint Expert Institute of the European Commission. It's difficult to reproach Brussels for their excessive love towards nuclear energy and Russia. However, the conclusions are absolutely clear that there is no proof that nuclear energy is more harmful than the types of energy that are already in the European taxonomy. In my understanding, this is indeed a revolutionary conclusion. There are also figures, the newest, the freshest figures of the European Commission, UNECE, where from the point of view of carbon footprint, nuclear energy is at the top. And we've always believed in our calculations that we share the top spot with wind generation, for instance, but colleagues from UNECE, from the United Nations, calculated that throughout the life cycle, nuclear energy is the leader, followed by all the other types of energy that are considered green, that are acknowledged as green. But furthermore, we need to acknowledge that the target state of nuclear energy that would be in line with the energy transition has not been reached yet. So just declaring the presence or availability of nuclear technologies in the carbon-free agenda is not enough. We have to clearly describe what type of energy will become the base, the integral part of the global energy balance. And all the works conducted by the international nuclear community, by the Russian Federation today, are aimed at the fourth generation of nuclear energy, which reduces by many times the probabilities of incidents. And the decisive issue is nuclear waste, of course, and of course economically completely different models are built for the use and application of nuclear power plants. Their assortment is quite large, from micro and small NPPs to major blocks that are being built all over the world very actively at the moment.
You've touched on some important considerations around the case for nuclear in the path towards net zero. Your Excellency, I wonder if I can come to you now, and as one of the largest logistics companies in the world, how are you thinking about net zero targets and the impact of your own operations on CO2 emissions?
Well, I can say we are, at DP World, we are very committed to COP26. We are taking Yes, you hear me? I'm sorry. Yes, we are very committed to COP26. I attended the meeting, and DP World has a target of reaching 20%, 28% neutrality in carbon neutrality by 2030. Actually, every year we reduce carbon emission in our facility around the world by 3%, and we're using renewable energy increase of 2% every year. In addition, we are also contributing in growing mangroves, over 100,000 between Southeast Asia, Indian subcontinent, and Latin America. I can tell you this, as a company, reducing carbon emission is saving us money. We have noticed by reducing, we saved. We saved on breakdown of machinery that use diesel when you convert to electricity. A lot of our lights today, either solar or also using less energy intensive lights like LED and so on. UAE is committed with the nuclear energy that we produce today in Abu Dhabi, as well as Masdar renewable energy, which are already in use. And again, Dubai also is committed with Shams Dubai, which is the largest single producer of solar in the world. And in fact, they're targeting 10% of Dubai energy use. In addition, also, there are steps taken to reduce using energy by alternative method or by more insulation. As a company, we are committed to add more and ensure that we are using it throughout our industry.
Thank you very much. And I like what you said about the cost of these initiatives, because I think often when we're talking about the transition, people are saying, who's going to finance this? How are we going to find the money to make this happen? But you've correctly pointed out that at the company level, in fact, it's financially beneficial to be pursuing some of these initiatives. And I think it's an important reminder. If you can press the... Yeah.
I can give you a small example. In Jabal Ali, our cost of electricity for the lights was about 10 million dirham a year, just the lights. We changed the light to LED, only LED, and the cost was 10 million, and the cost every year was 100,000. Okay, that is just one example. We have changed all our machinery that used to use diesel into electrical, and we saved a lot of money because we don't need to store fuel, we don't need to use fuel, we don't need to use spare part, breakdown is less. We have some ports around the world where there is no hydrocarbon energy used at all.
Those are some striking examples, and I hope the companies listening to us around the world are taking good notes of these benefits here. Dr. Sami, perhaps I can come to you in Cairo, and can you give us your view, A, on the overall role of nuclear and specifically how Egypt is looking at nuclear, and what do you think could be the potential share of nuclear in Egypt's total energy mix in the future?
Yeah, thank you very much for joining you. And I would like to thank the invitation of me to share in this important session. And in this regard, I would like to say that Egypt got benefit from the peaceful usage of the atomic energy since the mid of the last century, because this was an important objective from Egypt from that time to use the nuclear facilities, such like research reactors and other facilities, to get benefit from this usage in different fields. Since it's the first research reactor in the first of the 60s last century, and also started seriously for nuclear power programs for generating electricity from 1964. And also during the 70s and 80s, and for some reason the program was postponed. But during 2007, it was a strategic decision to start building a nuclear power plant for generating electricity, because this is, as you know, this is one of the green energy, but we have to look for the safety and security of using these facilities, of course. And fortunately, 2015's Egypt already signed an international agreement with Russia for building 4 nuclear power plant at the Dab'a site for generating 4,080 megawatts. So this will, represent like 3.3% of the capacity max of Egypt, because Egypt Vision 2030 aims to achieve diversity and the competitive and balanced economy with the framework of sustainable development. The strategy envisages a total share of more than 40% for renewable energy, including, of course, nuclear energy. This is what Egypt now, and already making a good progress in the nuclear power program with the Russian, of course, nuclear power plant authority now waiting for the construction permit, which will be planned to be issued during this year.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Dr. Sami. Dr. Noor, perhaps I can come to you here. Now, as you referenced in your first answer, Saudi Arabia did announce its net zero by 2060 target ahead of COP26. So I wonder if you can actually take some minutes to sort of drill down into how you see the key pillars of that strategy and what are the key challenges that need to be overcome to make them happen.
Thank you very much. Indeed, Saudi Arabia, leading up to the COP26, have announced, like other countries, its net zero target by 2060. And it has also doubled its NDCs, which was previously 130 million tons of CO2. It became 278 million tons of CO2 by 2030. And that target sets a roadmap for the net zero strategy in Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia has also announced the Saudi Arabia Green Initiative of planting 10 billion trees across the kingdom and 40 billion trees as part of the Middle East Green Initiative across the Middle East region. There's also plans for diversifying the energy mix. So the plan is to have 50% renewables by 2030. There's also a plan for nuclear power plant, 3.5 gigawatt, so 1 to 2 reactors in the nuclear power plant. Soon we will see the soliciting of bids. As you know, Saudi Arabia has signed with multiple countries important bilateral cooperation agreements for nuclear energy. Saudi Arabia is home to the world's largest carbon capture and utilization plant in SABIC, and plans to be the world's largest, home to the world's largest green hydrogen production, Sean mentioned in his intervention. The plans include diversifying also the economic base through these giga projects. One of them mentioned the NEOM project, which is a futuristic city that plans to run on 100% renewable energy, in addition to other giga projects that really have sustainability and clean energy at its heart, using renewable energy, using sustainability target, biodiversity protection, regenerative actually, and not only sustainable but regenerative tourism. As part of the plans also, Saudi Arabia in 2020 during the G20 presidency has proposed the circular carbon economy framework, which was endorsed by all the G20 countries. And in essence, this circular carbon economy framework is a holistic and integrated and pragmatic approach to managing emission. So we shift the focus from looking at, instead of looking at energy sources, we shift the focus to dealing with the emissions, managing the emissions, creating value out of the emissions. So instead of looking at CO2 as solely a negative externality, we look at it as an important feedstock for the industry. So the circular carbon economy framework is based on four main pathways: reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove carbon. So these are some of the initiatives, and perhaps we'll have a chance to even dig deeper in some of these initiatives.
We definitely will. Thank you very much indeed. And Sean, perhaps I'll come back to you. First of all, I've been warned that you're involved in some important negotiations with the EU soon, and we're going to need to let you go before the discussion comes to an end, so I'll make sure I have time to address at least one more question to you. But if we turn towards regulation, so ESG and particularly climate regulation is developing very quickly. And at the same time, one of the challenges is how regulation around the world could be harmonized. So do you think it's practical or viable to achieve universal ESG or climate impact requirements for different regions and different countries? And say, if you look at it maybe at the level of EU and the Middle East, how do you see that?
Look, there are many factors involved in ESG, environment, social and governance. Some of those are contextual to different markets and be different. But on the environmental, on the climate change, we have science. It is very, very clear. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of which Saudi, Russia, UAE are all represented, is very clear in what we need to do and the urgency of the situation and the commonality of the science across the world. There will be some differences to do with different starting points. A country like India that has very high levels of coal-fired power is likely to have to keep some of those going because we've got to keep the lights on. We have to keep industry moving while we build out solar. Will it or should it build new is the question. The International Energy Agency, in its World Energy Outlook, said very clearly to meet the 1.5 degree Paris Agreement target, we can't afford new coal, and in fact, we can't afford new gas around the world because of the longevity of the investments. And that's a common global situation. But when they get closed down, they will see very significant regional differences. Europe should be closing down all its coal by 2030. It's very clear in the modeling. Whereas Indonesia and India will probably take much longer to close down the existing plants because of how we have to transition our income, our economy, I should say. So in all of these areas, there are regional differentiations, but the science is still there. The urgency is still there. What we don't have is any more the wriggle room, the window, the space to build things that are inconsistent with the future that we know we must create for our children. And that means we don't have opportunity to build new fossil fuel generation activities. And that's difficult. And that means what we need to do is to keep everything that is low carbon. And I absolutely agree with Alexei that nuclear is a low carbon energy source. Let's make no mistake about that. Whether we want to build new nuclear or not is a different discussion. It's a different discussion about other risks, waste management and so on. I'll leave that alone. I'll leave that to the experts. But I certainly think it's a mistake to consider, such as Germany has, closing down nuclear before closing down coal and gas. Let me put that on the table. But that doesn't mean that we have the opportunity in countries, let's say Nigeria, to build up a big fossil fuel industry at the same time as we're trying to rid this problem globally. And the challenge for richer countries, for Europe, the US, Japan, is how to use their capital and their support to allow countries like Nigeria to choose a green path rather than non-green path. That will require transfer of credit risk. It'll require some subsidies. It'll require risk mitigation. We have a whole toolkit of things we can use there, and that's beginning to happen. You saw some of those announcements at COP. It's a big agenda, but we've got to keep our eye on what it is that we have to do here. And we also have to keep our eye on, therefore, the implications for our economies, such as the changes that Saudi now sees that it has to do, building up a hydrogen economy, for example, as part of that transition. That's part of the discussion. I hope that makes sense. I want to leave you with a sense of urgency, but also a sense of welcome about transitional activities that are being pursued in Gulf countries. We need to celebrate and support those.
Sean, it makes sense. There's certainly a lot to think about, but the sense of urgency, I think, has come across loud and clear from Australia. Towards the end of this discussion, I actually wanted to ask our speakers to look ahead to COP27 and outline what their expectations are and what their sort of key sort of considerations are going into that. But since I know we won't have you at the end of the discussion, perhaps I can ask you for your thoughts on COP27. What do you believe we need to be focusing on, and what are your expectations?
We need to be focusing on urgency. We need to be focusing on methane and how to capture it. We welcome Saudi's investments in carbon capture and sequestration for that reason, and how we transition all our economies, which will involve transport, vehicles, it'll involve agriculture, it'll involve the built environment. We need more cities like NEOM and fewer cities like Riyadh. That's essentially what we have to do. We have to understand what we've got to do. All of these things, but above all, what you will see and what we need to see is greater collaboration amongst the major economies of the world, supporting development economies with things like green finance. We'll see some developments as it is. Saudi has already announced it's going to do a green bond. Hallelujah. That's part of growing an economy. I hope that we'll see something out of Abu Dhabi and Dubai as well this year. We've already seen the adoption by the Russian Development Bank of a taxonomy of sustainable finance, which is absolutely in line with the science. We welcome these developments, and there'll be a lot more about it in Sharm el-Sheikh in a year's time, about how we advance that. You know, the green bond market is now $1.7 trillion outstanding. Every substantive economy in the world now has a growing green bond market. 10% of all issuance this year so far has been green globally. This is extraordinary change. That will grow rapidly this year and the year after. It looks like we have 2 years of COPs in MENA, from what the gossip is. I think we'll see a lot of progress in this agenda. And I look forward to being with you all in person during the course of this year, and of course at Sharm el-Sheikh at the end of the year.
Sean, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for finding time to be with us. Господин Likhachov, если можно...
Mr. Likhachov, I will get back to you. What can you do about the format of green status of nuclear energy? How does it meet the requirements of sustainability and especially EU taxonomy, such as complementary delegated act? Answering your questions about the act that was published, or the draft that was published on December 31st last year, the addition to the taxonomy, I can say that in general, we are sympathetic towards it because energy is related to green generation. But in terms of details, we have many questions to this document because they have several requirements for nuclear energy in terms of nuclear technologies and in terms of the setup of energy projects. And I believe that they have not been really well thought through. And our first requirement is that under no conditions we should discriminate. And the requirements for energy facilities should also cover other sources. Some colleagues who are here might correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the requirements to nuclear energy is that the project has reserves to remove it from operation. But don't we have to have the same requirements for other sources of energy? Don't we care about where the solar panels should go after they are done their work? I think such requirements should be to all other projects. And there are purely nuclear requirements. For example, use of tolerant fuel that reduces the risk of nuclear accidents. Yes, we welcome it. We welcome this requirement, but we should get deeper into the gist of it because it might lead to certain arguments. So this is answering your part of the question about the draft of the addition to the taxonomy of EU. But the pathway taken by EU leaders, we believe it's the right way to go. And I agree with my previous colleague who said that denouncing nuclear energy in Germany is a tragic mistake because all of the NPP that have been removed from operation, they were replaced by non-green energy. They were replaced by coal energy mainly. And today, the share of renewable sources in Germany is more than in France. However, their carbon footprint is higher because France, which has 70% of nuclear in its energy mix, has less footprint. And the second negative aspect of this decision by the German government is that they removed from the market high-tech industry, the scientific thought, scientific work, because if a country does not develop its technologies, the knowledge base, the fundamental science will not develop. And humankind has yet to discover many things about matter in fundamental science. Getting back to your question about why we are not just green, but also sustainable, it's a very serious question, and it's the right one, because in addition to low carbon footprint, nuclear power plant is a project that is being implemented within 10 years. And the prospected service life is 60 years with the extension of up to 100 years. It means that for the next 100 years, we understand the scope and cost of electrical energy. And this cost has little dependence on fluctuations of fuel price because the share of uranium in nuclear power is low percentage. When we move to closed fuel cycle, when the spent fuel is being circulated between reactors, then we have less and less demand for new uranium. So the price is stable, the generation is stable, new fuel cycles of innovative units have 10 years. So it's like a 10-year battery. The generation is 24/7. It does not depend on wind, solar, or any other weather phenomena. There is one more important factor. In the Soviet Union that I was born to, and in some other countries that in the previous century joined the nuclear club, of course, nuclear technologies was a key driver for development of science, technologies, and related fields. And among my peers, we have this idea that the Soviet Union managed to be on equal terms with other powerful states is thanks to peaceful atom and space industry. We took seriously the research within nuclear science, and it was a great driver for the development of sciences and technologies. And the countries who join us today, they follow the same path, and I'm always amazed and impressed by the United Arab Emirates. Just almost yesterday, they made a decision to join the nuclear club, and today 2 new units are connected to the power grids, and our partners are in discussions with us to develop other fields such as medicine, non-energy application, farming, etc. It all raises the quality of life, the quality of research, knowledge base, training of personnel. And I would like to highlight wherever we have nuclear competencies, new technology developments are set up. It's all about educated people, competent professionals.
Such a comprehensive answer. I made a couple of notes as I was listening to you, and I think that you correctly sort of highlighted the fact that on the one hand, it's quite easy for us to agree on the big picture, but sometimes when we start getting into the devil and the details, many more questions arise at that point. And I do also, I heard your message, which I totally support, of it's extremely important that we can avoid the politicization of some of these questions, because at the end of the day, if we get too bogged down in the politics, we're not going to focus on what really needs to be done. And I think that's a very important message that you raised there. We will continue a question around regulation, and Dr. Sami, I will come to you next. Just before I do, I'd like to also make one other remark. I know that Sean mentioned Saudi a number of times in his remarks, and after going to Dr. Sami, I'd like to come back to you, Dr. Noor, just to see if you have any observations or reactions to what was said, and whether you want to drill down into the Saudi strategy, and indeed perhaps the wider MENA region strategy. But before I come to you, Dr. Sami, let me address you around regulation, and how specifically how it relates to security and safety. These are two, obviously fundamental issues when it comes to nuclear. So how is Egypt doing with developing its regulatory system for its nuclear power plants? And again, what are the key challenges that you're focused on?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. And when Egypt take the strategic decision to having a nuclear power plant for generating electricity 2007, it was very important for Egypt to have a comprehensive nuclear law covering safety, security, safeguard, emergency, and civil liability. This law was issued 2010 under the number 7, which laid down a legal framework to regulate all the nuclear and the radiological activities in the Arab Republic of Egypt in the way that ensures the safety and security for human being, property, and environment against the hazard of ionizing radiation, of course. This law established ENRA as independent regulatory body responsible for regulating all these activities by developing, issuing the regulation requirements, making the review and assessment for all the documents related to safety, conducting the regulatory inspection for all nuclear and radiological activities, carrying out safeguard inspection for nuclear materials, and to control all the activities for transportation of radioactive materials, coordinating for emergency with other stakeholders. Of course, ENRA always tried to be a distinguished regulatory body in the national and regional and international level. level by taking its responsibility by all the transparency, excellence, reliability, and openness, and ensuring the compliance with the applicable laws and regulation, working efficiently, reducing the, engaged with the stockholders with full transparency, dealing with its employee as a key priority for ENRA. So the key challenges that we are focusing now, before speaking about it, let us speak about ENRA main achievements and milestones during the last time. It's already have a well-organized structure during 2019, and during 2020 it has a new premises full with all infrastructure needed to implement integrated management system and the electronic management system, developing regulation and guidelines with establishing regulatory procedures, conducting self-assessment for safety culture, improving the capabilities of the technical support and the laboratories that ENRA have, making the review and assessment and the inspection for Dabaa nuclear power plant. Of course, one of the many challenges that ENRA face, to be an effective and efficient regulatory body is to implementing its integrated management system and its electronic management system. This is already finalized more than 80% of this system, and also, utilizing the human capital as a tangible asset for ENRA by establishing a knowledge management system and constructing, and maintaining the capacity building processes. This was doing through its Center of Excellence, of course, and also, integrating the building capacity and the management in the management system. Also, of course, it is one of the main major elements establishing the communication with the consultation and the interested parties. By setting a clear communication strategy, this is one of the main challenges. This is what we already doing now.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Noor, perhaps I can come to you. As I mentioned, I think I'd like to give you a chance to respond to some of the comments that were made, and also if you would like to take a couple of minutes to set out wider regional considerations around net zero.
Thank you very much. So just to respond to Sean's earlier comments, specifically about having more of NEOM and less of Riyadh, I think it's very important to not discriminate based on the energy source, as I was saying. It's important to ensure a smooth transition, a just transition, and a reliable energy transition, because there is a cost associated with the disruption. And so it's important not to single out fossil fuels. And also commenting on the example that he provided, where he talked about Nigeria, a developing country and oil-producing countries. In his comments, he suggested that Nigeria should take a clean energy approach and a green energy approach and not build another fossil fuel plant. I think developing countries need to decide for themselves. They have the right to emit and they have the right to develop, and we must remember to uphold the rights enshrined in the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. Ironically, the Global South has contributed less to climate change, but will be impacted more by climate change. So it's very important to keep that in mind. And instead of, deciding or passing judgment or passing decisions based on behalf of developing countries, we really have to spare them and, allow them to choose the technology that they want and the energy source that they want. And the circular carbon economy allows for that. We need to keep all the options open: fossil fuels with carbon capture, utilization, and storage, nuclear energy, renewable energy. Each country should choose what's best for their country and based on their natural resources. So utilizing natural resources is actually part of sustainability. So if you want to have a sustainable pathway towards carbon circularity, carbon neutrality, and net zero future, you must take into consideration your national circumstances, the socio-economic background of the country, to ensure a smooth transition that's not disruptive. So discussing a little bit more on the initiatives that are undergoing. For sure, NEOM plans to be powered 100% by renewables, but Riyadh also has a sustainability strategy. There are economic-wide targets, such as the NDCs that were announced as part of the net zero strategy. And there are plans to even have, the planting of trees. Saudi Arabia will fund the planting of trees across the Middle East as part of the Middle East Green Initiative to plant 40 billion trees. So that's a Saudi initiative for the region. In addition to the Saudi Green Initiative in Saudi Arabia to plant 10 billion trees. Riyadh has the Riyadh Green Initiative as well for planting its own trees and have sustainability indicators across different indicators in different sectors within the city. So I guess this makes the way for the net zero pathway, grand plans on energy diversification, whether it's including renewables or nuclear as part of the energy mix. And through these initiatives and through the circular carbon economy, you're suggesting to have these hard-to-abate sectors participate in the transition. The hard-to-abate sectors will be the last to decarbonize, but nonetheless, they are an important part of this transition. And if we allow the use of cleaning or greening technologies such as the circular carbon economy initiatives, the carbon capture, utilization and storage, direct air capture, and other net zero technologies, we allow these sectors to participate in a transition towards carbon circularity, neutrality, and net zero. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that you made a number of very important points there, but I would particularly highlight what you were saying about how the impact of developing economies on the climate issues we face today is much less. The impact on them will be greater. And so I do think that when we're thinking about a global framework, one can't cancel the need for some flexibility and recognition of local specifics. Your Excellency, perhaps I can come to you now. When we're thinking about addressing climate change, obviously this is a collective effort. It needs to involve government, business, academia, science, and other stakeholders. And it's also a global effort and needs serious and effective international cooperation. So from where you're sitting, how do you assess the prospects for the kind of international collaboration that's needed, and what needs to be done for this to happen?
I think one of the issues we face today is from where I am standing, we deal with shipping lines. Shipping lines are also contributing a lot to pollution. There are regulations by IMO to reduce the energy consumption as well as carbon emission. In fact, it starts this year, maybe February or March, whereby they have to use different energy, and it is costing a lot for the companies, and many key people cannot achieve it. It's a regulation. But today, when you look at different energies, you get, for example, batteries, electricity, but for shipping line, it has a limitation. The best is green hydrogen. And we believe there should be more work on that as far as logistics to find the hydrogen available in places and ports whereby it can be easily delivered. And when economy of scale kicks in and there'll be more consumption, definitely with the production, the price will be important. We cannot ignore the damage to the oceans that are created by these things. And in fact, I must congratulate Mr. Ghochi as the head of Rosatom, where we collaborated with them on the Arctic route, where today, by reaching from the Far East to Europe, you're cutting half the distance. instead of sailing for 24,000 kilometers, you will be sailing in the Russian route 13,000. Cutting the trip of emissions from 40 days to 20 days. And the restrictions that will be there to protect the environment, whereby all the vessels traveling on this new route will be adhering to zero carbon, whereby it will be nuclear energy or other energies that our Rosatom is familiar with. And this is, I think, good news. It came timely because today the whole world in logistics is facing a big problem of delivering cargo, delays, increase in cost. And so when you get increase of cost, you might end up with people becoming compromising on the restrictions. So these things should be really addressed, in our opinion.
Thank you very much indeed. Господин Likhachov, значит, во-первых, если у вас...
Mr. Likhachov, first of all, if you want to make any comments, I would like to give you a chance because cooperation with you is very important. My question is, of course, we understand that climate factors are very important, but there are other factors, such as factors of cost efficiency. What is your system of coordinates when you make new decisions? And maybe you can give some examples of nuclear stations. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for your kind words. This is our mutual efforts, our joint project. Rosatom has several pathways in terms of sustainability and environment protection of our planet. We are a federal operator of managing waste of first and second danger classes. These are the most dangerous waste, and we are creating facilities to manage these waste materials. And this is great service to green energy. We're also building wind energy stations, and 1/3 of the Russian market of wind generation is built by Rosatom. Today we're going to build it up to 1 gigawatt.
And then there is a number of other areas, including new materials, including effective governance of municipal utilities, a smart cities project. We have some serious projects aimed at the improvements in healthcare. This is our contribution to sustainable development and to the sustainable agenda of our country and the planet as a whole. Coming back to your question about how the decisions are made about the construction of a power plant, of a nuclear power plant, of course, the decision is made based on a number of parameters. We have to clearly understand the energy requirements, how much throughout the long-term perspective, a minimum 50 years, preferably 70 to 80 years. So how much energy does a customer need throughout this period of time, be it the state, the government, or be it a private company? What sort of volumes of power do they actually need? The second thing is, what about the environment? Do they have a grid? What about the path to the consumer? How much will the delivery of this power to the consumer going to cost? And how can this have an impact on the project? The third point is cost. And there shouldn't be any discrimination in this regard, discrimination of different sources of energy when you do your estimates. Of course, if you take a coal-fired power plant, for instance, which was built on an coal deposit where people can pretty much manually throw in the coal to produce electricity, and it's been there for 15 or 20 years, of course its economic parameters will appear attractive, more attractive than, for instance, power generated by an NBP. But at the same time, when I'm saying we are for justice, what do I actually mean? It's not only about the environmental friendliness of power, it's also about the calculation period. what do we keep talking about? Okay, let's compare us to hydropower plants, for instance, to wind generation. But in your calculations, take at least 60 years. At least 60 years of design operation of a nuclear block. We don't even insist on the calculation of the extension up to 80, then to 100 years, although there is a scientific justification for that. And as soon as we start talking about the entire life cycle of a nuclear power plant from the point of view of emissions and from the point of view of cost, we get a very attractive set of figures. Let me give you two Russian examples. We have a lot of energy in Russia. You know that perfectly well. We have gas, we have hydropower plants, we are diversified, we manage our energy system very effectively. We're implementing two projects. The Baimsky ore zone, and very effectively we have a Kazakhstan investor. This is Chukotka up north. Then we have in Yakutia a gold deposit, one of the richest gold deposits discovered back in the Soviet times. For a number of years, investors were selecting the power supply scheme. They were trying to select the generator, types of generation, because projects can only be implemented with a full understanding of the baseline and the base energy. And both projects decided to use small nuclear power plants. One chose the floating NPP, and we're going to be building 4 floating NPPs for them, and the second one an onshore written 200 nuclear reactor. For one of these projects, we provide a guarantee for cost in rubles for 40 years. And of all the possible types of generation, and there are plenty of them in Russia, both investors, including a foreign investor, selected a nuclear power plant. Pretty much the same situation, I think, can be observed in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates. These countries are not energy deficient, not from the point of view of fossil fuels or the inability to use wind or solar, but nevertheless, in their development plans and their energy balances, they are including nuclear power, meaning that it's not on the satisfaction of the green energy demand. It's also about a significant impulse for the development of science, technologies, the society as such, and this is a very good platform for international cooperation. I cannot help but to welcome our Egyptian friends. We're working a lot together. We have already submitted design documents. We are expecting at least 1, maybe 2 licenses for the first 2 blocks this year. And of course, the Egyptian regulator, the very wise and independent regulator, a decision-making authority, and the customer is very qualified, the Egyptian Ministry of Energy. But all that is the agenda of the head of state. His Excellency President Sisi is following this with great attention. He's the patron of the project. It's always the agenda for a conversation between leaders, because cooperation in the nuclear sphere emphasizes a very special trusting relationship between countries and peoples. I'm still answering the question about the fact that the decision to build a specific nuclear facility is always a very comprehensive decision, multifaceted, complicated. And it also has a political connotation, but it is always associated with development. It is always associated with progress, including progress in political relations.
And as I mentioned, when we come to the close, I'd like to give every speaker a chance to address 2 issues. Number one, I would give everyone a chance to make any closing remarks or comments on what they've heard, but also to perhaps, if you were able to, give us your expectations or hopes for COP27. But before we do that, Dr. Sami, can I come back to you and elaborate on this question of sort of regulation, but also international cooperation, which we've heard a lot about now in the previous remarks. And so, how important is international cooperation for the organizations that regulate and service nuclear objects, and what, in your view, could be done to make it more effective?
Thank you very much. From the regulation point of view, the international cooperation, very important for any regulatory body to gain all the experience, the knowledge to, do its responsibility for having the safety and security for all the nuclear and radiological activity. This is very, very important to exchange the knowledge, the experience. So the law gave the freedom for ENRA to interact internationally with all the regulatory bodies, the international agencies really interested in this regard. So in this regard, ENRA has an MOU with Rostelechnadzor, the regulatory body in Russia. Also, it has a long-term contract with the technical support organization, the OSEFTI of RTN. This is to support ENRA in different areas, like developing the regulatory framework, the development of the integrated management system, the building capacity for the human resources, supporting us during the authorization, the inspection, and so. Also, we have an international technical support organization through making international pre-qualification and international limited tender. We have UGV, this is from Czech Republic, also for long-term 7 years, supporting us in different areas also. We have a good cooperation with IAA since, we are the member from the starting of IAA. We have a lot of cooperation through the technical cooperation project, through different review missions and so. This is very important from my point of view to exchange the knowledge, the experience, increasing our capabilities, carrying out our responsibility for having nuclear and radiological activities with safe and secure for all the life cycle of these activities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sami. And we're now entering our concluding round here. And Dr. Noor, I will come to you first. And so please feel free to take, and for every speaker to take 2 or 3 minutes to either provide any concluding remarks or responses to what you've heard, and maybe a look ahead to COP27.
Thank you very much. This has been a great panel. We've discussed a lot of issues surrounding net zero strategy, particularly nuclear, and I'd like to comment on His Excellency's remarks on the importance of nuclear power, not just for a clean energy transition. So there are obviously climate benefits, but there are underlying important benefits for advancing the industrial infrastructure of the country, raising the average salaries, increasing localization, the involvement of the country's workforce, so human capital development, industrial development. So there are plenty of benefits that comes with nuclear, and I really hope we see an explicit mention of nuclear in the coming COP meetings, since nuclear has not been officially and explicitly mentioned in any of the COP documents so far. So looking ahead at COP27, it's important to see the host of COP27, which will be Egypt. Egypt is part of the Arab League, so expecting to see the agenda of the Arab group very present in COP27. Egypt is also part of the like-minded developing countries group and part of the G77 plus China group and the African group. So all these overlapping agendas that highlight the stance of developing countries, we're expecting to see that in COP27 and to be followed also in COP28, where it will be hosted in the UAE, another developing country, another Arab country, another like-minded and G77 country. So we expect to see this in the agenda very present in the coming 2 COPs. Of course, this will be balanced by what already has been achieved in COP26, specifically mentioning fossil fuels, a net zero target, 1.5 degrees Celsius, as an important target to be reached by all countries, and doubling the emission and raising the doubling the NDC, and raising the ambitions of the countries. So hope to see the balance between the two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noor. And Your Excellency, perhaps I can come to you for your closing remarks or observations, as well as a look ahead to COP27.
Well, I attended COP26, and I can tell you the situation is very grave as far as the environment is concerned. We saw numbers that are much worse than what all expected. During the meetings, there is an agreement to take action, but take action now, because this is a grave situation. It affects every aspect of our life, and we should all work together to ensure that the steps agreed should be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and strongly endorse those words. Dr. Sami, perhaps I can come to you again for your concluding remarks and observations, as well as any look ahead to COP27. Certainly, I think, and I would add, after those cold weeks in Glasgow, I know we're all looking forward to coming to Sharm el-Sheikh. But over to you.
Yeah. You are welcome, of course, to COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, but it is really very important to integrate all of our efforts to, try to reduce the carbon emission by looking forward to a green energy, even nuclear energy, but looking for its safety and security. It is by our integration of our efforts, I optimize to reduce the emission of carbon dioxide and having, a clean energy for our life, better life.
Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Likhatchov, you have the final floor for your final remarks and also your most courageous expectations and hopes associated with COP27. Well, my remark is there's only one, and it's the most important one. Of course, I'm very thankful to all the participants of our today's discussion and to you, Mr. Moderator, for the very professional and very in-depth discussion of this topic. Believe me, myself and my colleagues here, those that have connected remotely, we will learn our lessons and derive serious conclusions. For us, this is a great help for future discussions on international platforms, not only about the fact that nuclear energy must be a part of the world energy balance, but also about what sort of nuclear energy that should our descendants look forward to, and which sort of nuclear energy the humankind should develop. Thank you very much for that. Now, coming back to your question, we are very indifferent about all the all the COP conferences. And as far as COP26 is concerned, we have shifted from the position of those that try to find excuses from the class of defendants. I'm not sure that the translators are going to translate them, to the class of the participants of the discussion. This is really a revolution, but this discussion isn't over and the revolution isn't over. And as far as COP27 is concerned, I'd like for us to be able to reach an international consensus in relation to the stages and technological approaches about the energy transition. We have to be honest and open. It's not only the nuclear energy that the heads of state haven't agreed on. On the whole, they've not been able to develop common approaches and common methodologies to assess and evaluate different types of energy and the stages that the countries will, of course, have to include voluntarily in their development programs. If not consensus, then at least agreement on part of most of the countries on these basic and fundamental areas should be accomplished at COP27. The second thing is that I fully agree that nuclear energy should be explicitly and directly mentioned as one of the equal participants of the transition. And the third thing, and we're going to offer this, suggest this to the organizers, we would like to have a number of discussions on this topic. What should be the nuclear energy of the next 50 years? What issues have to be addressed at the technological level, both in the national programs and within the framework of international associations, started, of course, with IAEA, the OECD Nuclear Agency, and other voluntary international organizations. First and foremost, the Association of Nuclear Organizations. We have things to say, we have things to offer to the global community, and we have someone to learn from, because these technologies are evolving. I see a special sign, I see special meaning in the fact that Egypt is the one to host this conference, country that is moving along its selected path, the path of the participant of the Global Nuclear Energy Club. The head of state is serious about this, and the leaders in the government are also positive about that, and we will do everything positive to prepare and to be represented in Sharm el-Sheikh at a good level in the new year that has already arrived, and I'm confident that there will be results that we will be able to discuss in this team later.
Conclusion from my side, I think we've covered a lot of very important ground here today. I think there are some issues where I heard a broad consensus. I think that as was correctly pointed out by Dr. Noura, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to every country around the world, and so the need to reflect sort of important local specifics is obviously critical. I think I heard that obviously it is clear that nuclear has a significant and formal role to play in achieving the net zero targets that face the world. And I think I also sort of heard the importance of avoiding unnecessary politicization of these issues, because the reality is that these are very fundamental, real issues, and we can't drown in politics here. At the same time, there are a number of questions that clearly require more work, that clearly require more thoughts, where there's no simple answer, and so COP27 and future events like this will continue to be very necessary as we work through these issues. So with that, I would just like to thank very much all of our speakers here. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for those in the room with us, and also the many hundreds of people around the world who are watching us online. Thank you, all of you, and we'll meet again next year.
You feel